Are you the one, struggling with negative thoughts in your head that wake you up at 3 a.m.? Are you the one, trying to shut up that voice with medications or drugs to no avail, maybe even having an addiction now? Are you the one, that is under the control of your fear alter ego? Well, if that's the case, then sit back, tune in, and listen up to Shut Up, Stop Talking to Me, a podcast by Dr. Chris Allen Shreve, PhD. This is an in-depth clinical expose into the mind of trauma and the negative voice. Stay tuned. Welcome today. My name is Dr. Chris Allen Shreve, and I'm your host on today's show called Shut Up, Stop Talking to Me. That's the name of the podcast, and it really piggybacks on a book that I'm releasing in about 30 days that talks about what happens to our mind when we're under the effects of stress. And so the book really talks about being under the fight or flight reactions, and it talks about what I think happens to people. They develop sort of an alter ego that begins to have sort of a personality inside of their mind as well. And so the book really talks about how people are overexposed to fear and or under some type of attack, which is my new definition of trauma, and how that begins to start a cascading effect of how the brain begins to dysregulate and start to fire these fight or flight reactions. So a lot of my patients, I didn't realize, are coming into my office in the various states of survival: fight, flight, freeze, and sometimes even hypersexual, or in some cases non-sexual. So what I've been learning from the patients that I've worked with over the last 31 years is that many folks are in a state of fight or flight. And so the book is really talking about the journey that those fight or flight circuits take people on when they think that their personality is the personality of their trauma circuits. So today we have a very special guest in the studio with me, and I want to introduce Mary. And Mary is a former patient of mine that I've worked with, and we've been talking about the book over our course of therapy. And I just want to welcome you, Mary, to the show. And I'm really grateful that you're coming in to really talk about your journey with me in our therapy. And, I introduced this kind of concept to you because you've had some therapy in the past, and I think you said no one has ever kind of shared the therapy journey the way that I've shared it with you. And so you've taught me as well as I think I've taught you some things. And so I wanted to bring you to the show today so you can kind of tell your story about how this approach that I've kind of put together, nothing's new under the sun, but I think I have repackaged a way in which people can really understand what's really going on in their brains and have a powerful tool to combat that negative inner voice. And so that's what the title of the book is called, Shut Up, Stop Talking to Me, so we can turn that negative voice in our head. So I want to welcome you, Mary, to the show. And so how are you doing today, Mary?
Well, thank you, Doctor. Thank you, first of all, for inviting me. I really thank you for giving me the opportunity to share my story and how you've helped me immensely.
Well, I'm flattered and honored to be on that team of yours, absolutely.
Because as you said before, I've had lots of different therapists and whatever, but I don't think we ever really got to the root of the problem.
Yeah.
And it's fear. It's fear.
Yeah.
And I always jokingly say that I came out of the womb fearful. I mean, as a very little girl.
Okay.
I was just frightful. I was just afraid people around me would die.
Yeah. What age did that start for our viewers so they kind of know when?
Sure.
Yeah.
To remember, it was about 5 or 6,
okay,
around that age,
right.
5 or 6.
First fear, I put that in the book. I asked people that question. First fear, what do you remember as your first fears? What were you afraid of?
People. Literally, when relatives would come over, I would go hide.
Wow.
And secondly, I was always afraid if my mom and dad weren't around that something would happen, like something like this feeling.
Okay.
Which I believe I've been fighting that all my life, like something horrible is going to happen to my loved ones.
A doom feeling.
Exactly.
Right? Like a death. I write in a book that I think sometimes people's stories or their experiences in their life trigger what I call the death circuit. And I think that's when you're overexposed to that fear and the body just absorbs that. It's like, wow, we could have died or something bad could have happened. And, I've been studying this in more detail neurologically, and I think what happens is that this is all a stress response. And so when the brain is stressed out like that, it goes into a state of incoherence. And then you've got like 5 brain waves, your alpha, beta, theta, delta, and gamma waves. They all become dysregulated. So the brain just goes out of sync when we're exposed like that. And then because we're in a high beta state in our thinking now, the brain is preparing us for fight or flight. And so the voice that turns on is a voice of worst case scenario. I just read this in a research documentary last week. In fact, I'm going to be re-editing that, putting a little bit of that in the book before it's released, because this really becomes a neurological problem, where people's state of fight or flight is triggered by the stories of their life, and it creates these immense emotions that begin to create the fear that you're talking about. So tell us more about your journey, fear and all of that. Yeah.
Well, I know, again, back into my childhood, as far as I can remember, I was fearful. And a couple examples of that, when I went to school, kindergarten and first grade, if they brought in a teacher that I wasn't, maybe the regular teacher was off and a sub came in, I cried so badly they would have to literally have me sit with the principal, or my parents would have to come and pick me up, because it was just so frightening. Because what happened to the other teacher? I mean,
so your mind just started going to worst case scenario, right? Well, what happened? It must something bad.
Exactly.
And then your body was you're probably anxious, I'd imagine, and probably wanted to go home, I bet. Right. So what are you thinking? I know we may not have even talked about this in actual session. What do you think is the story that got that fear machine running at such an early age? Because I see this every day with people. We always say it always starts in childhood. And it's not a cliche. So what do you think might have gotten this thing going?
The only thing that I can think of is, my mother, she was very nervous.
Okay.
I mean, she totally high anxiety.
Okay.
Even at the end of her life, she couldn't leave the house. She was just so much in anxiety state.
OCD, perhaps?
Possibly. She grew up in a time that it wasn't okay to see a therapist. It wasn't okay to go get help. So she never got help for herself. And I just wonder, though, being brought up maybe in that type of atmosphere, because I'm sure my mother just didn't get this problem.
Everybody has a story, right?
Yeah, and that maybe it rubbed off on me. The world possibly was fearful. I was brought up that the world is not safe.
It's what happened. I just had a patient yesterday. I just said they asked me, well, do you think growing up with an anxious mother is why I'm anxious? I'm like, yes, because it's not genetic typically. It's social learning. We become what we are around. And so if you had a anxious mother, which this patient did, this patient inherited watching the mother be anxious and then develop. It's like the chicken or the egg.
Right.
You can watch someone be anxious and then mimic that behavior, and then your body will create the anxiety because that's what you're thinking. And so that's probably what happened. You were imprinted by watching your mother be fearful. I mean, my mom, she's a worrywart, and I used to be a worrywart until I kind of figured this all out and realized that a lot of what we're afraid of is never going to happen, but we'll talk about that later. But I realized, like, well, why am I such a worrywart? Like I have a daughter right now out of town, and things are, you just start to worry. The mind will just take you on that ride. And so I laugh. I said, well, I watch my mom worry, watch my aunts worry, and even my dad a little bit worry. And so I think we do inherit that in terms of mimicking that kind of behavior. So yes. So let me ask you. So let's fast forward a little bit. So what else? So your fear started to keep growing and mushrooming and blossoming out. Where else did it go? Where did this fear energy go in your body? Where did it take you?
Well, getting back to my mother. I never wanted to upset my mother because she was so nervous and she was worried about everything. That's the worst thing that's how I felt as a little girl.
So
that's
walking
the worst
on
thing.
eggshells, yeah.
Right, and the worst thing I could have done was to bring her any problems. So I learned very easy, just pretend everything's okay, you know.
Okay, sure.
Like certain things happen in childhood, which we all go through, but I just knew instinctively not to bring it to my mom because it would be bad
So
for
you had to
her.
be perfect.
Yeah, I had to at least, I don't know, perfect word. I had to act like I was happy when I was, when I wasn't happy.
So, so you were developing an authentic persona already at a very early age. So now let's kind of fast forward a little bit, and so you got married, and so I know our journey started because of, I guess, fear of relapsing to alcohol, and so I know, and without giving away your story, that I think what we learned is that this fear that was never really managed needed to be addressed. How did you begin to address that? How did the alcohol come
back
into play?
up.
Yeah,
It was, I had a very fearful, I went through high school fearful, and then I discovered alcohol.
Okay.
It was great. I mean, truthfully.
Like a party or something, or?
Boone's Farm, I'm kind of old.
Goodness.
I'm kind of old, I know. Back in the 70s.
Boone's Farm?
Strawberry Hill.
Way back.
Strawberry Hill.
Oh my God! Oh, this is too funny.
Oh yeah. And in the 70s, 1972, I discovered Boone's Farm, and it took everything away, and it was really my life started then. I mean, it worked.
Yeah.
And I went for years.
And it worked to do what?
To cover up the fear.
The fear.
I was no longer fearful.
So like a chemical suppressing of the fear with the alcohol. So talk a little bit about where that ended up at and what.
Sure, and I went for years having fun. My sister, she's a recovering alcoholic, but my brother's a recovering alcoholic. But they were both drinkers, so we were all having a good time. I can't tell you what a great period of my life that was, because I didn't have the fear. It was taken away.
Right.
All I needed to do was take a drink.
Like a Xanax. Xanax kind of like, Well, that's kind of, they're chemically very similar in the brain. They activate the same receptor sites. So that's why Xanax and alcohol can become very addictive, especially if you're medicating pain. Right. Go ahead. Yeah.
So then I continued drinking them, and I don't know when it happened exactly, but I crossed that line that they say when you're an alcoholic. It no longer was fun anymore.
Okay.
And now I just drank out of desperation.
Okay.
And really what I was trying to do, I was chasing my first high. I wanted that high back where it took care of my problems.
Right.
And in fact, it wasn't taking away the fear anymore.
So typically when that happens chemically and neurologically, people have to deal with that. They either have to increase dosage or increase potency or both. Did that happen to you?
Oh yeah, definitely. I drank more and more wine, more and more. First it was a little bottle, then it was a medium, then it was a large.
Okay.
I was drinking myself sick every night.
Right.
And I started to withdraw from society, and my fear, instead of it being taken care of, now it's tripled. Now I'm really, and the drink's not working.
Right.
And I was in a really bad state, so.
So you knew that alcohol wasn't a solution, but at that point you're saying you were too far in.
Exactly.
So you couldn't stop.
No, of course not.
Okay.
At least it gave me, now I'm drinking to black out. That was my only release.
Okay.
I can drink to black out and escape from the world, but it wasn't fun anymore. I wasn't getting that nice high that I used to get.
So like you created sort of an alter ego like Blackout Baby.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. How
Absolutely.
scary did that get?
It got really scary because I was blacking out at parties. I was putting myself in real dangerous situations with pretty shady people.
Okay.
And,
driving possibly, maybe?
Driving, ending up in blind pigs with people that you really don't want to hang around.
You kind of come out of it because the alcohol wears off. You're like, where am I?
Where am I?
Wow.
Again.
Yeah.
So at that point, and a lot of women do that, alcoholic, drug addict women, what we do is we retreat. We can't go out there and... so again, my world just...
So that forced isolation again.
Oh.
What was going on with the fear at that point? Did it come back, or were you still dealing with fear in this?
Lots of fear.
Okay.
It was getting worse. The fear and the depression that goes along with it was coming back, and I would just keep trying to down it, but it wasn't working anymore. It was not working anymore. The fear was just...
Was it the same fear like in childhood, or did it morph into different fears? Did you have different kinds of fears? Because you're talking about being, 20, 21, and 25 in that range, 30. So what were your fears? What were you afraid of? What were you hearing in your head? That's the book is like, shut up, stop talking to me. What was that voice saying to you? What was the fear that it was trying to convince you of?
At this point, my fear was, you're a loser, you're not going to be anything in life.
Oh, wow.
You're
So
really
low self-esteem attack.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And what's the purpose? I mean, I wasn't suicidal,
okay,
but I do believe if I didn't get help, I probably would have been suicidal, because I was heading in that direction, just alone. People would invite me places, and I just wouldn't go. No, I'd really just stayed isolated.
We were talking before we started taping, and you were talking about what some of your colleagues in the recovery community are experiencing right now. And you asked me a very important question. I think we should kind of talk a little bit about that, because I think it ties into this very well. Because we're now in COVID, almost going into a year and a half, and so I think what I'm seeing in practice, and I think we're picking up maybe even with some of our stars in the Olympics who are, this mental health piece is really a big uptick. And I was just reading the latest Sports Illustration, and there's a couple other articles in the Sports Illustration about other athletes and mental health. And when I hear these interviews with these athletes, they all seem to talk about that negative voice, that's getting to them. And so you were saying you're hearing the same thing with some of your colleagues and cohorts in the AA groups and something like that. And you even expressed some concerns about what's going on in the body, what's happened to us, what are we feeling right now? Because it feels almost like not like a relapse approaching, but I think it's activated the fight or flight response again. What is your concern? You were bringing that up. Yeah.
It's like a hopeless feeling. I've been asking a lot of, because I've just been down lately, and I've been talking to a lot of my recovering people, my friends, and there's a sense of doom. Mm-hmm. What's the use? Mm-hmm. Here we go again. Mm-hmm. Because... And I know it was hard for most people. I'm not minimizing what, COVID, the shutdowns, the lockdowns, all that stuff. Yeah. But for an addict, that's what we have to fight against is isolation. That's like giving us a loaded gun. Absolutely. Telling us to isolate?
Yeah.
No.
And with home delivery from your neighborhood liquor store who take your Cash App card, they made it too easy for folks.
So in the recovery community, there's a sense of fear and hopelessness that's going on. And it's like, here we go again. Are we going to survive? We've lost a lot of people through this, addicts and...
Absolutely.
We've lost them.
Yes, and because a lot of people relapsed.
And we're scared.
Who were in really hardcore recoveries, they've relapsed. Mm-hmm. And I think that sent shockwaves. And like I said, we're in a time and space where there's no precedent.
No.
We're in survival mode. What I realized very quickly last March, not this past, a year ago March, when I started working from home, I knew my body went into some flux. I had absolutely no energy. I could only see 2 or 3 people a day, and I was wiped out. I had to sleep the whole day. And I was like, do I have COVID?
Sure.
Because the body, but I knew what was going on is that not only was I helping everyone with their issues, but I'm human too. So we're all making these adjustments. We've got this invisible killer that at that point we didn't know anything about. So I think it put us all in a state of fight or flight. And so I think what we're experiencing now, because unfortunately we're having a resurgence, with the Delta strain. And so I think it's reflaring people who were kind of coming out of the fight or flight, getting back to a sense of normal. Now we're kind of reshuffling, going back to maybe a weird state of fight or flight again. Is that what you're picking up with some of your...
absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. There was such joy, and you could just tell. It was almost like spring. Well, it was spring.
Right.
Everybody was coming out of their houses. Life was good again. It's over.
Yeah.
And it's back, and it's just, it's almost like, are we going to survive this again?
Yeah. Now, that's kind of like why we're here to do this show, because isn't that what you're hearing in your head?
Yes, totally.
Exactly.
Yeah, are we going to survive this again?
Right.
Am I going to go in the state that I did over the winter?
Right.
I'm scared. It's almost like we've been there. We've been to war.
Right.
Are we going to be through it again?
Yeah. And I'm glad we're here so we can process this out. I know we're doing a podcast, but it seems like we got to do a little work today. But what's happening is, I think it's putting everybody back in fight or flight again. So the PTSD, because PTSD focuses really on the past and the unpredictability of the future, right? So when our minds get turned on, stress, again, there's the uptick in the numbers, the delta, here we go again. And the people that are not vaccinating, and if they're not vaccinated at this point, they're not getting vaccinated. So we probably have a third of our population that's not going to get vaccinated. So that's triggering our survival circuits. They watch the news with us. Our survival alter egos, they like, oh yeah, those numbers are upticking. Let's send some more fear into her brain and shut her down. And that's what's happening. And if it gets so bad, some people will need to medicate it. All prescription medications are up. Prozac, all the benzodiazepines and barbiturates, because people are having more anxiety and more panic and more fight or flight reaction, more insomnia, more overthinking. And that's why we're doing this podcast, and that's why I wrote the book. The COVID is just a coincidence as it relates to the book, because I started writing this book before COVID happened. But now that we're in the midst of a pandemic, the metaphor in the book is, the person or the virus, or like I said to some people, the computer, which is us, or the virus, which is our life stories that are coming in to our brain that are activating these fight or flight responses. And I think we're all, as the world has endured this pandemic. So we're coming out of it, and it's just, I think we don't know yet, how it's affected us. What is going to be the residual effects of living in a state of fight or flight for 18 months? The body wasn't designed to stay in a state of stress like this. It's okay to, if you're, like a lion and you're chasing after a llama, if the llama gets away, he goes back to grazing in the grass again. If you and I get chased by a lion, we got to go talk about it. We got to go to therapy. We're not going to sleep that night. We got to talk. And that lion almost got you. It almost got me. And I was like, yeah. The llama, he just like, well, I got away, and I'm going back to eating and chilling out. And that's just not how we operate. When we're under that kind of stressor, the brain records it, and we stay in that fight or flight until it gets processed out. So if you live a life in stress, then the book really talks about what I think happens, and people taught me this. You morph into that personality. So what you think on, you become. What you think about, you bring about. So if you think you're living in a world of attack and fear, that's the world you create in your mind. I just start to see it as a personality that people have created, which is what the book's about. It's the altered personality. It's not their authentic self. And so I think if I've helped you in any way, is to discover the power of your authentic self. Tell us a little bit more about your story. I know you got married in this story, in this journey. And
well, let's see. I got sober. Back when I was 30. And prior to that, I got married. I was, actually a practicing alcoholic, as we call it.
And attracted to sound like one as well.
Of course.
Oh, what a coincidence, right?
We hang together.
Right. Right.
And then
unfortunately, didn't get sober together, though.
No, and that was the problem.
Yeah.
When I decided to get sober, my ex didn't feel that he needed to.
Right.
And then eventually I couldn't live with that. And then we ended up to be divorced. And then my fear kicked in.
Okay. Did it change, or did it grow into something new fear?
It grew a lot, because now, a little bit about my family history.
Yeah.
My brother, my sister, my mother, we're all alcoholics. And I didn't want that to happen to my boys.
Okay.
I just didn't want that to happen for my boys. And the fear was so great that I had to stop it, And then, but they're on their own journey, and I'm not going to, tell them, everyone, their story.
Right.
But they're on their own. They definitely got the gene.
Or they learned well.
Whatever.
Right. They watched folks
they are
who practiced
the family
it well.
of alcoholics.
Sure. Yeah.
And they're living their life. And my... As you know, that's why I came to you, because I was just so full of fear. And how can I fix everybody? Because going back to with my mother, obviously I couldn't save her. I can't save anybody.
Yeah.
And
did you know that when we started, or was that still running behind the frame of your mind?
As you said, and us alcoholics, we always talk about, we have two people in us. We always do.
That's why this motto is great, right? Because that's what the book says. Like, right.
And we do.
Right.
Exactly. And we say, whose voice am I going to listen to today? And I never understood it till you explained it. That is a voice.
That is a real voice. It's not your voice. That's the real discovery.
That's what I learned from you. That was my breakthrough. Because I always called it my alcoholic self, my recovery self.
Yeah.
But I believe that was a real voice, though. But it wasn't a real voice. That was a voice that I came up with to whatever.
Well, it's
you explain it better than I do.
For our viewers, it's what happens when we're under stress and the brain stays in that state, that high beta state, is the high thinking state where the brain just goes into overdrive and it's worst case scenario. So you were living in a high beta state for years. And so your thinking shifted and it fueled all the fear. And the fear never got shut down because you never amped the brain down until we started talking. And so I think what I helped you figure out is, well, if this alcoholic self is not a part of me, then who is it? What is it? And so I think I was able to prove to you that what you're hearing is not a part of you. It runs through you, but you have no control over that. And so I think when I tell people that, they start to well, wait a minute, I thought that was me talking to me. No,
right.
No, that's why I say the alter ego talking to you. And our show today is about the alter ego. Well, we said of alcohol, but it's really a fear that drove the whole thing, that led you to alcohol as a way to medicate the mood problems that are triggered when you're in fight or flight. And I think that's what I kind of gave you, a target to attack that was not yourself. Does that make sense?
No, that makes very good sense, and that isn't myself, and that alter ego's out to kill me.
No, hello.
Is to
Wake
kill
up,
me.
viewers. Did you hear that?
Kill me.
Right.
Because I got myself in such a state with this voice telling me, something's going to happen. You don't know what's going to happen, Margaret, but it's going to be horrific.
Right.
And that I was having panic attacks.
Well, why wouldn't you?
No, it was like...
I can imagine debilitating panic attacks. I can imagine. Did you have dissociative moments with that, kind of out-of-body kind of moments?
Oh, my God, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And if anybody's gone through a period of high anxiety, I was getting claustrophobic.
Mm-hmm.
I was in my bedroom. I felt the walls were coming in at me.
Mm-hmm.
I sometimes in traffic, I wanted to run out of my car.
Right.
I mean, this fear was real.
Yes.
The voice may not be real, but the fear that this voice...
It triggers the body to think it's real fear, though. And so you go to fight or flight. Let me get out of here. Let me run. Let me fight.
Mm-hmm.
Let me faint.
Mm-hmm. And I get it. I get it where people, they start not to leave their house. I get it.
Yeah.
I was on that path.
Yeah. But they're hearing it's probably not safe outside.
Exactly.
You should probably check that lock one more time. I know it's 100 times, but do it 101.
Mm-hmm.
And then they still can't be convinced that the door's not locked. So it triggers OCD, claustrophobia, because the brain is dysregulated and is trying to, save you from what it thinks is fear. And in the book, I kind of say it's like a radar on a plane that gets all these bleeps. And so the pilot's trying to figure out, well, what is all this? Is this a plane coming our way? Is this a mountain? What do we do? Do we dive? Do we go higher? Do we, So the brain starts to beep. And the person's like, well, that's something to be afraid of. That's something to be afraid of. Oh, my God. And so you're just walking around just beep, 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 beep. And then we start to live in the world that everything is beeping now. But they're always false blips. Because that's what saved me. I figured this out really to save myself from fear. And you know what did it for me? It was just, I heard this somewhere, and he said, 90% of what you're afraid of is never going to happen. And I'm like, what? Wait a minute, I'm afraid. I spend 2 or 3 hours about things I'm afraid of. I'm living in a fear suit. And then when he says, well, but you're living in an illusion, I was like, wow. And so I thought about it. It took me a couple of weeks to get it, actually. And I said, he's right. Fear is an illusion because 90% of what I did the test. I said, well, wait a minute. Let me do a list. Top 5 things that I spent time on being afraid of last year, not including the COVID year, because, a lot of things really did happen. But even in the COVID year, a lot of things really didn't happen, but I just exclude COVID because, people did die and lose jobs. And, worst case scenarios did happen. But aside from COVID, when I asked this question to people, of the things that you worried about for the last year or two, your top 5, what happened? And I think I asked you. And you just nodded no again. Right?
Really?
Nothing.
In fact, a lot of things turned out to be better.
Yes. And then, but what does our mind say to us? It's all bad. It's never good. And that's what I had to realize. Wait a minute. This mind, that part of our mind, is a running tape. It's looped. Because then I read something else that 90% of what we thought about yesterday, what we heard yesterday, we're going to hear today. So that proved it's a looped program of fear, And I was like, wow. And so it's an illusion. And so that's what, I realized. I was like, wow, so we're living in an illusion of fear, and our mind just takes it and runs with it. And that's kind of what I was just sharing with you, what I've just learned from people. And you kind of like, well, yeah, that's exactly what happened. So what else in the story would you care to share about? I know you were worried about your sons, and unfortunately they had their battle with this as well. And not to focus on them so much, but what did that do to your fear at that point? Where did that go? Because you never relapsed through any of this.
No, I did not.
But I think you had a fear relapse.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. You didn't have a chemical relapse. You had a fear relapse. So what happened? I know one of your sons, they're both doing well. But I know one had a little tougher journey than the other. And, it was Mama Bear and that kind of thing. What kind of ride did that take you on?
Well, I wanted to stop the pain because the pain was so great.
Right.
Maybe my pain.
From watching.
Maybe my loved ones they're on their own journey and they have to learn their own lessons. Maybe it was my pain I was trying to stop.
Yeah.
Because if I can make everything okay on the outside, then I'm going to feel good.
Okay. So that self-esteem piece again.
Absolutely,
and quieting the anxiety, I'm sure
and I just go back to to my original fear that something could happen to my loved ones.
Right.
And when you're talking about addiction, stuff does happen to people.
Unpredictable life, yeah.
It does.
Yeah.
I mean, it really does. So my job, and that's why I initially came to you, my voice was so loud telling me, oh my God, my boys are going to die, that I couldn't even hear the healthy side. I literally was making myself crazy.
Well, I think you probably would have gotten physically sick too, I imagine.
No sleep.
No sleep, right.
No.
Probably not eating right.
I can honestly tell you, last winter, before I talked to you, that was the worst time in my life.
Wow.
My anxiety was so high, and there's nothing I could do with it. And then add COVID,
my goodness.
It was,
and then being locked in the house, and
and every time I would talk to you, you would just keep telling me the same thing over and over, and that's what I had to, because this voice is strong.
Yeah.
I was just telling you the story, and it's kind of funny, but it's not funny. I was getting a hearing test, and I was put in a little room because my fear manifests claustrophobia. And all of a sudden, that voice, you got to get out of here.
Right.
You got to get out of here.
She looks around in this podcast room.
I thought the same thing.
Wait a minute, it's getting a little hot in here.
But that voice came, but it's through the tools that you gave me. I just started talking back to it like, really?
Right. That's all you got for me today.
You're going to run out of here in the middle of a hearing test.
Right. Now that's... What was the tool, though? I mean, because I don't want people to miss that, because it's a very subtle tool, though.
First, I acknowledged that it was a voice.
Yeah,
I acknowledged that
separate from yourself.
Now, I'm fearful.
Right. Yeah.
And some voice is telling me this, and that's not the real voice. This is a lie. Okay.
Room safe. It's okay. I'm good. Right.
The woman's right through the window there.
Nobody's
I'm sure
gonna
there's
hit
not
me,
a problem.
protect me. My purse is okay. Right.
And sounds kind of weird. I talked myself through it.
It's not weird. It's a technique.
And I was fine, and I went through the whatever.
Right.
But when it first hit, I really thought, I got to get out of here.
Yeah.
It's like,
Well,
I got to take my purse and get out of here.
Right. Well, why do you think people open up a door of a plane in flight? It's nothing different.
I get that. Right.
I had a patient, she didn't quite go there, but she was on a flight, it sounded like from hell. It was turbulent coming back into Detroit, and I guess there was like a roller coaster ride. Even the flight attendants were crying. And I was like, Lord, that's a scary flight. And so she came out, we did a session, it's like, and Dr. Shreve, I am never flying again. And now I don't even like tight rooms. I don't like a lot of people around me. What happened to me? I said, you're in fight or flight. I said, you need to go get a deep tissue body massage, because you have to physically sometimes force that energy out of your body, because the body records that. You know, there's a book out by Vanderpook, and it's called The Body Keeps the Score, and he talks a lot about the recording of trauma in the tissues. And so you have to flush that stuff out. You have to do things to put the brain back into regulation and to put the body back under control from the fight or flight circuits. These circuits are working correctly. Look, if I had that kind of flight, my brain should alert me on the next trip. Yo, you remember that last flight you took? You want to do this again? And then some people will say no. Right. When the reality is, that's a once-in-a-lifetime kind of a flight. I mean, I've been in some bad flights, but you don't want to be in another one. I get it. But do you want to live a life where you don't travel?
Right.
See, this is what happens. That's why I'm writing the book. Because if you let that play out, you know what I told her to do? Book another flight.
Yeah, absolutely.
You got to book another flight. Because if you sit there and intellectualize it like human beings do versus the llama that got away and went back to eating, they're not processing, I just got chased by a lion. I don't know if they remember. I don't think they have a cortex to even remember the event, because all reactions, fight or flight. Either I live or I die. I lived. Okay, let me go back to eat. But for us, we will process it. Oh, man, I could have died. Ooh, wow, you know, ooh. And then by the time you just amping up your chemistry, and your cognition is like, yeah, girl, you better not book another flight. You know, that trip to Cancun, you better cancel that. Because that's what she said. She's like, I got a trip planned to Cancun, and should I go? And I'm like, yeah, you should go. Right? If not, give me the tickets and I'll go for you. But, you know, but people are terrified. And I get it, because you're triggering the death circuit.
Well, I have my own flight story. One time I was on a flight, and nothing was even wrong, but all I know is they made me sit in the back.
Okay.
You know?
Yeah.
So I'm sitting there, and I'm seeing all these people, and I'm looking at the plane, thought, you know what?
If I need to get out of here.
I better get out of here. No, I literally said, I got to get out of here.
Because you were
So I ran up toward the cabin. They don't like that, by the way. They don't like you charging up toward the front.
Especially when the plane's moving, gearing to take off.
Exactly. I said, I got to get off this plane.
Open the door!
No, I did. I said, I got to get off this plane. And the flight attendant said, you can't get off this flight. The doors are closed and we're taking off. Go sit down. I said, you don't understand.
What kind of language came out? Be honest.
I said, I got to get out of here.
Right.
So they put me in first class, and they treated me like, so I wouldn't freak out. So they gave me, you know, water and pop and, you know, treated me like a princess. But that feeling is a lie. It's real. It's real in the moment.
Absolutely. And it triggers what I don't think any other person has coined it the death circuit, but I think what it activates is your sense, I could die right now. Just like near drowning. I picked this up with near drowning folk. You know, even 3.5-year-olds who don't even remember the event, their body's still recording it as a death event because they're terrified of water. How it came up is the mom said, could you talk to him about taking a shower? He doesn't like water. He don't like taking a shower. I thought it was a cute little story. And so what happened is I realized that that he had a near drowning episode, and he didn't remember it. His mother did. And so, but they had just thought it wasn't anything significant. And so when his mom came in to tell me the story, her boyfriend threw him in a pool, and he almost drowned. And, you know, so he didn't even remember it, but his body recorded an issue with water. And so he just doesn't do pulls. He doesn't. He showers. He just,
Aww.
you know, he doesn't like the water coming down over his face. You know, because it triggers this flashback that he doesn't even really remember, but the body remembers it. So that's how I picked all this up. The body records everything. And people walked into my office in a triggered state. Because, you know, I would say to folks, like, you know, they come in, the paperwork would say anxiety, depression, insomnia. And then when they would walk in, I'd do the evaluation, and I'd start talking, asking questions. And I'm like, I would say this to myself, I'm like, where is their self? They don't have depression. They have become depression. So I started to realize people's personalities were overran by their trauma circuits. They had morphed into their diagnosis, personality-wise. So everything they said, did, think, or do was from a lens of depression or from a lens of anxiety or fear. And so when I started to see that, I'm like, well, what's happened to the authentic self? And so I think the other thing that reemerged from our journey is you discovered, I think, a deeper sense of your authentic self. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yes. I know what isn't my authentic self is that fear-based, you know, everything's going to be bad, don't do it, don't whatever, just keep yourself safe. Just, you know, it's going to be bad. You don't know what, but it's going to be bad. My authentic self is one that I can enjoy life, and I can be, my focus is on me. I can be the best I can, because when I'm focused on this voice telling me all this bad stuff that's going to happen, I'm not living a life. I'm living in this fear-based, just
whatever it says, that's what you do, right? Yeah, stay home. All right, stay home. You know, right? Yeah. And restricted life. You know, which triggers the isolation and more depression and then more anxiety, and then could trigger what? The relapse.
And my authentic self, life is good.
Yes.
You know, even if stuff does happen, life's still good.
Yes.
I mean, stuff does happen.
It's
you know
life.
What? People are gonna die.
It happens every day.
People are gonna die. But the authentic self is really one that can love people for who they are.
Right.
And they can live today, and they can just breathe.
So how does the voice sound on the authentic side? What do you hear now that you didn't hear before? Because I think when I first met you, and I don't think I ever told you this, because I don't always say this to folks, but I never give up on people, but I don't always know what to do with folk. And, you know, when I would hear you talk in session, I was like, whoa, she is so afraid. I was like, how am I going to convince her? Oh, this is an illusion. Whoa, you know, because you had the trigger. You know, the triggers were still hitting you. And so when you have these triggers, which happen to be, you know, your son, which your alter ego kept saying doom and gloom, but the reality was he's uptrending tremendously. But your alter ego said, no, it's only going to last a day. No, you know, it's only going to, you know, no, it's not real. You know, as soon as he gets out of whatever, he's going to just, your mind kept triggering all that. And you kept spiraling. And I was like, whoa, how am I going to break this party up? So I was just looking for an opportunity with you to kind of shoot some shots in there to kind of get you to get out of this fight or flight mode that was really what you came in as. You didn't come in as yourself. You came in as the alter. And that's what I started to realize with people. They're coming in as their alter. I just didn't know what to call it at that point. I was like, well, that's not their self. I said, well, their authentic self is gone. And then that's where I started to conceptualize this alter ego thing. Like, well, they've morphed into the alter ego of fear or of suicide or of depression or, in this case, of drinking. Because what you came in was the concerns about relapse with the anxiety. And you've held strong. But then it really was more of a problem about fear. Because I kept saying to myself, like, well, you've been in recovery for 25 years.
30.
30. Why are you so damn afraid? What are you afraid of? What, you know, I just couldn't get in compute for me. You know, and so I was like, there's still something so powerful still there that I think you were afraid of relapse. And I'm like, well, why would you be afraid of relapse after 30 years in? You've been to meetings, you could run meetings, you could write a book about recovery. What's missed here? And we didn't get to the core of the fear and what was still the death circuit fear, the fear that people around you are going to die and you can't save them. That's really your altar. Mm-hmm. Anyone who has that kind of fear is going to have to medicate it. So we unfortunately do with drugs and alcohol because they work, unfortunately. So what I'm just saying, well, let's shut that down because that's not going to really work long term. Let's go to like meditation. Let's go to like yoga. And you're an athletic kind of person, so it's easy for you to bike ride and walk because you have to physiologically and neurologically bring the brain out of beta state and amp it down to delta and gamma, where we're more in control of the physiological part of the body. This is all really a neurological discussion of stress and what it does to the brain. My book is really about the alter egos that walked into the office in this state, and they just had different characteristics. So the book and these podcasts are really unpacking the prototypes of these alter egos, because they're all a little bit different. So like yours was a mix of drinking and fear. Other people's is, low self-esteem, and I think you had some low self-esteem sub-programs, because what I realized, we have predominant programs, and then we have sub-programs that kind of get fed too. So I know a lot of it's fed on a low self-esteem mainframe for you. Because very early, as you told me, you didn't have a really good sense of self. So that's going to trigger fight or flight. So that's kind of what you've taught me. I know I've helped you, but you've made this book much more rich by sharing with me not only your story, but just sharing what I've learned.
Right.
And just helping you to understand you're living in an illusion of your mind. And as I said, I didn't really know how to get that thought in there with you. And so I just, wait for that moment and keep chipping away and, and we got there, And I think what emerged is you understanding that you still had a subfloor virus to flush out.
And the most important thing, one of the most important things I've learned with you, that voice is never going to go away.
Yeah.
That voice is never going to go away.
Right.
But I can talk back to it.
You can shut him up. Yep.
To do that, I have to keep myself healthy.
That's right.
And one of the ways that I do that, you said about nature and everything. Is that why, doctor?
Yeah.
I crave going out to the woods and walk.
Put your feet in dirt.
Why do I do that? I need it.
Is grounding to the planet.
Really?
You're grounding your energy into the ground, Mother Earth. I don't want to get all Native American on you, but that's what that's about. I purposefully go into my gardens with my feet bare and dig my feet into the soil. Do a meditation like that.
Okay.
Go hug a tree.
No, I do. Don't laugh.
I used to laugh at that, but I get it now. Because trees' roots go into the ground. And so when you hug a tree, you're connecting to the energy that is into the roots. We're getting a little bit into the metaphysical parts, but it's about healing and how you turn the voice off. You have to stay present, and you have to stay in your authentic self. And what does that? Grounding, meditation, bike riding, walking.
And I have been doing that, and it's helped me immensely.
Yes. So that's what you've taught me is when you can understand you're not your virus, but you have one, then you get better. Now, we don't even use those terms in therapy, because, you come out of remission or your symptoms are less severe. No, I think I've seen people actually, I don't want to use the word get cured, because like you said, the voice never goes away.
Yeah.
So that battle is still ongoing, but we win the battle because you lose the battle when you forget this. Because if you forget what we've just talked about, where do you go back to? The voice.
Yeah.
Because you thought that's who you were to begin with. And that's where that saying comes in. There's misery, there's comfort in misery or something. Even though that altered voice, the life that you had as an alcoholic and drinking, I don't even use the term alcoholic, but it was a life of chaos, but there was some comfort in it because it keeps people trapped in it.
Stop the voice.
Yeah. Yeah.
For a while.
Yeah. Yeah. And so people, I think sometimes, and I had a patient this week that I had to end the relationship, and she's a drinker, and she gave up. Some people with this alcoholic alter ego, it's hard to kick. Mm-hmm. And I've always told you, I commend you for your recovery because I know if you don't get it right, you die. Mm-hmm. And I've been trying to tell her for 7 months, you're going to kill yourself. And I just couldn't stand by and keep watching her. And she has an alter ego that is ferocious, a life of isolation, no support systems, and it's a disaster. And then I had to bail on her because, I know how to help get this fixed. You got to follow what I'm saying. And see, here's why I stuck with her for so long, and I never give up on people because now I understand I'm really battling your alter ego. I'm not battling you. I'm battling the alter who doesn't want to go to rehab.
Right.
Because you, the drinker in misery, you want help. Mm-hmm. The alter is like, oh, hell no, we're not going to rehab, and we'll give you 50,000 reasons why not to go. But never say you're not going to die. Right? You're going to lose your job. Or, who's going to pay your bills? What's going to happen while you're in rehab? You don't know these people. It ain't going to say, well, your liver going to burn out. Right? Your kidneys are going to give out. Right? You're going to get that DUI. That's $10,000 out of your pocketbook, and you still might go to jail. It doesn't say that to you.
No.
It keeps telling you things to keep its existence alive. That's why I say, well, what the hell is that? Is that what is that? I work with people who have dissociative identity disorder. They actually have multiple personalities in one house. I was like, was that what's going on? And in the book, I kind of play with that notion that I don't think these folks have another actual alter like a dissociative identity disorder patient, but it comes awfully close. Especially with the chemical dependency ones. They take over the body and they rock the body.
I believe that 100%.
And will rock you to the grave until you come out of it, and it's just so difficult. Because I think in her case, she just gave up.
That's sad.
She couldn't beat it. She couldn't, like you said, the voice doesn't go away. So you got to stay on your game, and you've got to play a game that you have never played before. It's like watching the Olympic athletes. They've got to run the race of their life. If you're going to beat this alcohol thing, you got to get out ahead of it, and you got to keep running. Mm-hmm. And that's what this is about. What we're talking about is getting out ahead and keep running. And we discovered you had things that kept pulling you back. Mm-hmm. That made you even, I think, a little worried about your recovery.
Oh, absolutely. I was worried about my recovery. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we are really kind of getting to the point of wrapping it up. And, I just, I knew this was going to be a great podcast, and I really appreciate your story of courage and of really working with me. And when I first created this, I thought it was the craziest approach in the world. Like, you have an alter ego. Like, alter ego? No, I got depression. I got a drinking problem. What are you talking about, alter ego? And then when I lay it out, then folks were like, well, okay. Well, yeah, I didn't want to do that. I mean, I didn't know why I did that. And, and so when I start to talk, it's like, well, maybe there is something to this. And so you're probably the 150th patient now that I've been using this model with, and so I have a lot more confidence, so I don't feel so crazy now. And because I see people are benefiting from the analogy. I think the therapy is just ultimately I'm helping you separate out of the virus and back into your authentic self. We're going to let you end our podcast. What would you like to say to our viewers and listeners before we leave?
No, your life is worth living, and you can do it. It takes work, as the doctor was saying. It takes a lot of work, and it takes courage, and it takes open-mindedness.
Yes.
But you can do it. You don't have to live in that life. I've lived it. It's a horrible place to live, and You can change it.
Yeah.
And you know what you're gonna see is that I remember when I got into recovery, people would tell me it'll get better, and I thought, better than what?
Right.
You don't know what better is.
Right.
You know what? Life is better today.
Yes.
But you got to work it.
Yeah.
You got to work with people like you, doctor, because I can't fix myself.
Right.
Boy, would I love to
But
fix
guess
myself.
what? The beautiful thing is, and we're ending on this note, there's nothing broken in you.
Thank you.
You have a bad virus running on your mainframe that you thought was you. And all I did was convince you that that is not who you are. It's not complicated. And viewers, we're going to end on that note.
Thank you.
Thank you guys for joining us today for Shut Up, Stop Talking to Me with Dr. Chris Allen Shreve. We'll see you next time.
You're gonna be great. It's gonna be all right.
Are you the one, struggling with negative thoughts in your head that wake you up at 3 a.m.? Are you the one, trying to shut up that voice with medications or drugs to no avail, maybe even having an addiction now? Are you the one, that is under the control of your fear alter ego? Well, if that's the case, then sit back, tune in, and listen up to Shut Up, Stop Talking to Me, a podcast by Dr. Chris Allen Shreve, PhD. This is an in-depth clinical expose into the mind of trauma and the negative voice. Stay tuned.